So today, we are going to get into a huge question. What exactly is India's grand strategy? And the best way to understand it is to look at this one really dramatic moment. We're going to untangle how a friendship with the US that looked totally rock solid suddenly just fell apart. Because that single event, it tells us everything about India's playbook for a world where alliances are constantly shifting. All right, let's set the scene here. You probably remember this, right? For a little while, it seriously looked like India's Prime Minister Modi and the US President Trump were practically best friends. There were rallies, state visits, the whole thing. But then, almost overnight, poof, the relationship just went south. And the big question we're left with is, what on earth happened? Just look at how fast this all went down. If we map it out, in February, you've got this honeymoon phase, all smiles, handshakes, a super friendly meeting. But fast forward to July, the tone is completely different. President Trump is publicly criticizing India. So what happened in between? Well, smack in the middle, in May, there's this major military clash between India and Pakistan. And that seems to be the moment everything changed. Okay, so here's our game plan to untangle this whole web. First, we'll look at that honeymoon to conflict story. Then, we'll dive into the Pakistan incident. After that, we'll check out India's other allies, see what's going on with China, and then tie it all together into India's grand strategy, and finally, why this whole thing really matters. All right, let's dive right in. Section 1, honeymoon to conflict. What was the official story here? What did they say was the reason for this sudden change of heart? So the public line, the official reason given, was all about oil. President Trump apparently cited India's huge purchases of Russian crude oil. The argument went something like this: hey, you're undermining Western sanctions and funding the war in Ukraine. And on the surface, that sounds pretty possible, doesn't it? Yeah, but was that really the reason? Because when you look closer, the official story starts to get a little shaky. The big problem is the timing. See, India had been buying tons of Russian oil for months, even back in February when everyone was best friends. So if that was the real issue, why the sudden explosion of anger in July? It doesn't quite add up. Something else had to be going on. And that something else brings us to the real catalyst, the Pakistan incident. This is where we uncover what was really going on behind the scenes. It all centered on this incredibly dangerous 4-day military clash that erupted between India and Pakistan, two nuclear-armed neighbors, mind you, in the Kashmir region. Now, the key detail here isn't so much the conflict itself, but how it ended. Because you had two completely different stories coming out. India's claim was pretty straightforward. Our military operations chiefs got on the phone and resolved it. Simple. But Pakistan? They had a very different take. Their claim was, we want to thank President Trump for his successful mediation. Whoa. Two countries, two totally different narratives about the same event. And then, well, the man himself weighed in. President Trump went on social media and essentially said, it was me. I was able to mediate and bring about a ceasefire. He wanted full credit, right? He wanted to be the peacemaker. So when India publicly pushed back and said, thanks, but no thanks, we handled it ourselves, it was seen as a major public snub. It was a direct blow to his ego. And that, right there, seems to be the moment the relationship completely soured. Okay, so that whole incident kind of forces us to zoom out a bit. To really get the picture, we have to look at India's other important allies. And where better to start than with Russia? The country that was at the heart of the official reason for the fallout. So let's talk about this Russian oil. If you look at the numbers, before the invasion of Ukraine, Russia wasn't even a top 10 supplier for India. But after, whoosh, it skyrocketed to become their #1 source of crude. It's pretty simple, really. The West put sanctions on Russian oil, the price plummeted, and India, with its gigantic economy and massive energy needs, saw a deal that was just too good to refuse. But here's the thing, it's not just about getting a discount on oil. India's partnership with Russia is way deeper and way more practical than that. For starters, an estimated 60% of India's entire military arsenal is made up of Russian or Soviet gear. Think about that. Plus, they have this long history of friendly ties going all the way back to the Soviet era. And to protect that relationship, India has walked this very careful tightrope of neutrality, for example, by abstaining from UN votes that condemn Russia. The bottom line is, they just can't afford to alienate Moscow. All right, let's add another fascinating piece to this puzzle. Just as things were getting really frosty with the United States, India does something pretty surprising. It starts to warm up to its biggest rival, China. This wasn't just talk, either. Prime Minister Modi made a state visit, the first one in 7 years. So what's going on there? So why would India suddenly start re-engaging with China, its main competitor? Well, it's a very calculated move. First, there's just pure economic necessity. China is a huge trade partner, and you can't just ignore that. Second, it's about strategic hedging. India doesn't want to put all its eggs in one basket, relying only on the West. There's also this growing belief that global power is shifting, and the US isn't the only game in town anymore. And finally, from a practical standpoint, it's better to try and manage a tense border than to be in a state of constant simmering conflict. Okay, let's step back for a second. We've got India making the US angry while also staying tight with Russia, and at the exact same time, making nice with China. It looks messy, right? It seems totally contradictory, but it's not. All of these moves are actually connected by one big overarching idea, and that is India's grand strategy. The bedrock of this whole strategy is a concept called strategic autonomy. And this isn't a new idea. Its roots go way back to the Cold War, when India was a leader of what was called the non-aligned movement. The core principle has always been the same, and it's simple. Don't get tied down. Don't enter into formal, binding alliances with any major power. That way, you always maintain your independence to make your own calls. But today, that idea has evolved into something a lot more active. Experts now call it multi-alignment, and the difference is key. This isn't about being passive or non-aligned anymore. You could almost say it's about being all aligned. It's a proactive strategy. It means you go out and you build coalitions with multiple, often competing powers. You work with whomever you need to on a case-by-case basis to get the absolute best deal for India in that specific situation. So what does this multi-alignment playbook actually look like in practice? Well, it looks like this. On one hand, you partner with the West. You engage in security groups like the Quad with the US, Japan, and Australia. At the exact same time, you maintain ties with Russia and China through groups like BRICS. You pursue massive economic deals with China, even while you're having serious border disputes. And through it all, you position yourself as a leader of the global South, trying to be a bridge between the developed and developing worlds. It really is a complex diplomatic dance. So let's get to the bottom line. Why does any of this matter? Well, in a world that seems to be splitting into different camps, understanding the playbook of a rising giant like India isn't just interesting, it's absolutely crucial. And maybe the biggest takeaway for powers like the US and Japan is this. That old mindset that you're either with us or against us thinking, it just doesn't apply to India. That kind of black and white Cold War logic is totally out the window in New Delhi. They will partner with anyone, friend or rival, if they believe it serves India's national interest. Period. You know, there's an old saying that just sums this up perfectly. India has no forever friends or forever enemies, only forever interests. It's not about shared values or ideology. It's about cold, hard, pragmatic calculation of what benefits India. Your friend today could be your rival tomorrow, and your rival could be your partner on a different issue next week. Everything is fluid. And all of this leaves us with a really fascinating question for the future. As the world fractures more and more into these competing blocks, can India really pull this off? Can it successfully serve as a bridge between all these different powers? Or, as the pressure keeps mounting, is a day going to come when the world's largest democracy is finally forced to choose a side? The answer to that question, well, it's probably going to shape the rest of our century.